Hi y'all, welcome back to my channel, and welcome back to the Reading Through the Bible in a Year series. Today we will be talking about Samuel, which is crazy to think that the last video I posted was Ruth, because since finishing Ruth, I have finished 14 books that I have not filmed. I literally just finished Song of Songs today. I will be starting Isaiah tomorrow. And the last time I had to catch up on filming, I had to film, I think, 3 videos in a row. Needless to say, I'm not going to film all 14 today. I do want to dive into 1 Samuel right now. The 1 Samuel was written by Samuel with additions from prophets Gad and Nathan. And then for my general takeaways from the book, I have quite a couple, so bear with me. The first one I wrote starts with the birth of Samuel. The second one I wrote story of the Lord calling Samuel, which is in chapter 3. Next, I wrote a couple chapters dedicated to the ark being stolen and how Israel got it back. Next one, I wrote Samuel judges over Israel his whole life, and once he got to the end of his life, Israel demanded that they have a king. Next point I wrote was that Saul was anointed king by Samuel. This happens in chapter 10. Following that, I wrote David is anointed king by Samuel, which happens in chapter 16. The story of David and Goliath is in chapter 17. David and Jonathan's friendship is in chapter 18. Saul becomes jealous of David and tries to murder him. This is in chapters 18 through 23. David's best friend Jonathan was Saul's son, which adds a different layer to the fact that Saul was trying to kill him. David spares Saul's life. This happens in chapter 24 and 26. Samuel dies in chapter 25. Finally, the book ends with Saul's death. So yeah, at this point, I have read this book a long time ago. So this is definitely a thorough overview of what I took away from that book. And it's just a good refresh, honestly, rereading this now, what the book of 1 Samuel is all about. Moving on to the didn't know / didn't realize section of the video. I have 8 things that I took away in this section, which is crazy. So let's get started. The first one I wrote is in 1 Samuel 1:8. God asked Hannah why she was sad and not eating. God took notice of her despair and lack of taking care of herself. I do remember reading this verse. I thought that was just a very sweet note to read about. And it's happened before already in the Bible, just God paying attention to when his people aren't taking care of their human needs. And that seems like such a minor thing, but like when we're talking about God, like we're talking about God, you know what I mean? Like he is so much bigger, so much more important than us as humans. And the fact that he takes notice in when his people aren't taking care of themselves and their very human basic needs. I don't know, I really appreciate that. Second thing I wrote is that at the end of verse 18 in chapter 1, it says, "Then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad." I also wrote that this made me chuckle. I'm assuming just because my last note was talking about Hannah that we're still talking about Hannah. And I just appreciate that. I feel like this is also mentioned in the Bible. I know there's a verse, and I know I'm forgetting where, but who it was. Who was it in the Bible? There's someone in the Bible that I want to say either God or it might have even been Jesus in the New Testament. Basically, they told the person to eat and sleep, and then after they ate and slept, they just felt better because they're just truly breaking it down to like their human needs at that point. I loved this note where it literally said she ate and her face was no longer sad. I don't know. I really liked that one. The third thing I wrote is that at the end of chapter 10, when Saul is anointed king, most of the people were excited to finally have a man appointed king, even saying things like, "Long live the king." But in verse 27, some men despised Saul and brought him no gifts after he became king. And it says that, quote, "but he held his peace." And I wrote that this made me chuckle because I love that that was mentioned. Like the fact that not everyone was happy you were king and he didn't get gifts from everyone, but the fact he still managed to hold his peace. I do remember reading this and I do remember laughing at myself. And again, not that these things are inherently made to like made us laugh, you know, years, centuries past the event, but I remember reading that like he didn't get gifts from every single person and that he managed to hold his peace, and I was like, wow, look at him, he managed to hold his peace. And I'm sure it's much more serious and important back then, but I'm so far removed from that event now, obviously I'm like, I found it slightly humorous to read that, so. The fourth thing I wrote comes from 1 Samuel 15 verses 10 through 11, is that God told Samuel he regretted making Saul king because Saul was no longer following God. Yeah, I'm glad I'm rereading this and re-remembering this because I think that just stuck out to me because just the directness of like communication that God had with him, with just like regretting a decision. Maybe that's also what stuck out to me when I wrote that down. I don't think you hear that often in the Bible, God regretting a decision, because God is all-knowing, God is omnipotent, he's omnipresent, so he would know the outcome. but to vocalize the regret, still having made the decision. I don't know, I just found that really fascinating, so I think that's why that also stuck out to me. Fifth thing I wrote was that even though David was just anointed king, he still played the lyre for Saul, which was the prior king, to soothe his soul because the Spirit of the Lord was within David now. This was in 1 Samuel 16, verses 14 through 23. Obviously, we'll read later in the Bible that David is not a perfect human, and again, spoiler alert, none of us are. I think that definitely goes to show his character, at least especially during this time period in his life, of who David was, and the fact that he still wanted to share God's Spirit with him even though it was no longer with Saul. I don't know, that just really stuck out to me. The sixth thing I wrote was that when David's oldest brother saw him at the camp, he accused him of coming just to watch the battle. This was in 1 Samuel 17, verses 28 through 30. I'm glad I'm rereading this section because this is coming from chapter 17, which is the story of David and Goliath. And I don't know, I don't know that I've ever really heard much about David's siblings, really. And to like hear this interaction between brothers, it just screamed siblings to me, I guess. So yeah, I thought that was kind of funny. The seventh thing I wrote for this section was that I just loved how beautifully written David and Jonathan's friendship was. Example, 1 Samuel 20, verse 17. They loved each other's souls. Again, I feel like you don't get to read about these healthy, beautiful acts of love between men often. Yeah, just to read it for you guys real quick. 1 Samuel 20, verse 17 reads, "And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul." Yeah, I think I talked about this in one of my prior videos. I forget which book of the Bible, but something about the relationship and friendship between men in the Bible can be, and this is a great example of it, shown in such a beautiful way that I just feel like you don't get in today's society and pop culture necessarily. And maybe this is coming from the perspective of a woman, so I don't know, but this is just my perspective, I guess. I really appreciate that, because I just feel like you don't get to read about that in today's society, so. I love good, healthy examples of men having relationships with other men. I feel like that's a really good thing to read about. And then the last thing I wrote for this section was that despite being anointed king and sparing Saul's life twice, David spent a huge chunk of his life, as well a lot of this book, on the run and in hiding for fear of his life. Yeah, I do remember that reading this book. It was a rough time for David. He was constantly being sought to be ended, so I felt like that took up a huge chunk of this book. And then finally, my favorite verse from this book I wrote was 1 Samuel 16, verse 7, which reads, "But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his presence or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." Yeah, I really like that one. Again, I feel like this is something that's probably already been mentioned, that we've read about and will continue to read about. Just truly, we get to read and at least attempt to understand God's heart, and these verses really show us glimpses of that. And also show us glimpses as, like, how our humanness will never fully comprehend how God doesn't care about the things that we make worthy in our humanness, which is, like, outward appearance, whereas God really only cares about our hearts. And for so many reasons, y'all, that just makes my heart so happy. I mean, obviously, for one, it's, like, so relieving to read about, because all this human stuff, all this outward stuff, it shows. Like, it just does not matter to God. What matters to God is who you are in here and who your heart belongs to. And I love how it makes it feel so much more simple than how much more complicated we tend to make it out to be as, like, as humans, if that makes any sense. Like, I feel like as humans, we can make the topic of faith and religion such a more complicated thing than it needs to be, when truly at the heart of it all, God just wants our hearts, and that's it. So yeah, I'm glad we got to recap 1 Samuel today. I'm very excited to recap 2 Samuel in a second. As always, all of these videos are being added to a playlist on my channel, and it will be linked below, so feel free to check them out if you want to see the other books that I am recapping. Like I mentioned, I have finished 14 books, so I am going through this very quickly and at a much faster rate, to the point that I haven't had a chance to even film and share all my thoughts. So being 75 soft while also trying to finish the Bible in a year is a great combo. It'll really push you through that challenge, I promise. So yeah, that is all I have for you guys today. As always, I hope you guys are having a good day, but if you're not, that's okay too. I will catch you guys in the next one. Bye!